Dave, thank you for showing up virtually. Um, I just wanted to give a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and the chat is disabled. And I am going to turn it over to Jenny, who will take roll call before public comment, and she'll verbally confirm whether or not there's quorum. So thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, you bet. So it looks like I'll run through the roll. Looks like at the moment we don't, but we'll go ahead and start. Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Davala.
So could I chime in? I'm sorry. My name is Andy Smith. I'm the Chief of Staff for Representative Anderson. He's traveling, so I'm here on his behalf today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. All right. And Commissioner Davala, I think I see you there. And next we've got Commissioner Detman. Hi, Lori.
Hi, I'm not sure if we're supposed to stay here.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Commissioner Gielen. I don't see her yet. Commissioner Kay Williams.
Hello, everybody. I'm here.
Commissioner Keast.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lewis. See him yet. Commissioner Murphy. Commissioner Perez. Commissioner Rogers.
I am here. Thank you.
And Commissioner Detman, I see you with us now.
Yep.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks.
And Chair Armstrong Romero.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
So Kyla, at the moment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At the moment, we're only at 6 commissioners. So we're not quite at quorum. I don't know if we can go ahead and get started on things. If there's any voting that needs to take place today.
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. There's no voting that will be taking place today. So
Okay.
thank you,
Very
Jenny.
good. Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, at this time, I would like to invite members of the public to comment. Please keep your testimony to 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes. Is there any member of the public that would like to make a comment today? Hearing none, I do want to give everyone a reminder that there will be an opportunity for public comment at the end of this meeting, and discussion during the meeting is reserved for members of the commission as well. And I do want to take an opportunity to welcome Commissioner Keast to the Juvenile Justice Policy Commission, and you will be representing OPDC, correct? Welcome. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So the way that we are going to start off our meeting, we are going to start off with giving folks 5 minutes before our discussion. And this 5 minutes will be so that you can collect your thoughts, look at any inventory that you may have missed or didn't get a chance to review. And Kelly Gwen will share a 5-minute timer that will show on the screen for that portion of time. And then after that 5 minutes, each person will be asked to provide their input and contribute to a round robin discussion. So we are going to go in alphabetical order. There will be a timer set for 3 minutes per person. Kelly will share her screen with the timer when there's about 30 seconds left. And then we will have a broader discussion as a group. So with this format, we are hoping to hear from everyone, diverse voices in the room. And I'm really excited to engage in this conversation. And thank you to everyone for prioritizing this impromptu commission meeting. So with that, we can begin the timer for 5 minutes and we'll come back. Please feel free to turn off your cameras as well. I just had a question come to me about which materials we're reviewing. I just wanted to remind everyone that we are reviewing the inventory that the technical assistance providers completed. There's over 80 documents in that inventory. Commissioners were asked to review that inventory before today's meeting. And so we're giving folks just a few minutes. If you've already reviewed it, great. If you haven't, you have about 3 minutes and 54 seconds to take a look and think about what you'd like to contribute to this conversation. All right. Please raise your hand if you feel like you need an extra 2 minutes. It is okay if you do. I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand, so let's go ahead and start with our round robin. Jenny, if you wouldn't mind helping me with the alphabetical order, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Now, first person on our list would be Commissioner Anderson. So I don't know if Andrew has some things he wants to share on his behalf, or do you want to do that, Andrew?
Sure, I'm happy to do that and appreciate the opportunity. So I work as Representative Anderson's Chief of Staff, so appreciate a lot of the work that has gone into the inventory. So I think what I would frame it as, to be helpful to my boss and other legislators that happen to be in this role today, would be really focusing on the third category, the recommended improvements. So just to let me kind of frame out how that is helpful to my boss and other legislators, because certainly they're operating at a pretty high level most of the time. But to basically think about those improvements in two different buckets. One would be, of course, the dollars, the budgetary type recommendation. But then there might be recommendations that would be budgetary, would be neutral in a budget sense, especially approaching the short session, and perhaps longer in the future, we may be in a constrained fiscal environment. So basically think about the focus for the legislators to be helpful, to kind of get to the 45,000 foot statewide perspective as a system funder, to think about kind of budget recommendations and policy recommendations. And then another overlay that's always helpful for legislators is to how do those improvements relate to system outcomes. So pretty high level deliverables is helpful on our end. Obviously there's a lot of work that's more closer to the ground and granular and could be different. But in terms of the legislative role and the ability for my boss and others to help, I think this body could be helpful to kind of aggregate at a very high level recommendations, recommended system improvements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to allow for any discussion? Or are we ready for the next commissioner?
I think if we can just keep going, we'll have a larger discussion at the end. And I am taking some notes, and I hope that you are as well, so that we can go back to what people are saying. So
perfect. So
thanks,
next up would be Commissioner Davala.
Hey, I can't quite figure out how to turn my camera back on. It says it's on, but it's not. So I don't know. Oh, wait here. Nope. Oh, there it is. Yes. Okay. So what exactly, would you mind telling me exactly what the question is that we're answering right now?
Sure. So just anything that jumped out at you in the inventory and the Juvenile Justice Policy Commission and the work that we hope to embark upon, the journey we hope to embark upon, thinking about the priorities that we set early on and where we're going, next steps, and if anything in this inventory was something that called out to you or something that you would like to focus on.
Yeah, Lisa actually just shared with me a document that was talking about, I mean, like there was a whole bunch of documents, but it was one of the ones in there just focusing on, what has caused like the specific factors that had increased juvenile delinquency. And so and then it kind of did like a summary at the end of the protective factors, but it didn't necessarily go into that data. So I guess that's really what I would be most curious about, is like a really high level summary of what has been effective, what has specifically reduced the chances of recidivism, the chances of getting involved in the first place. And so just like, I feel like the inventory is really, it's big and it's got all these documents. So kind of like I would love to see like just a very high level overview like that, where we could focus in on a few things. I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but that's what I was thinking of from reviewing it all.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, we're going to have a larger discussion, but the purpose of the commission and why we thought it was important to start with the inventory, it's really to, we are established, or hopefully we will begin to establish ourselves as an authoritative body and really focus on juvenile justice policy, which, we are a policy commission and not a resource commission. So I just want to uplift that. But if anything is speaking to you from this inventory that you think is a priority for the commission to focus on, or if there's any gaps that you've found, that's kind of the question. But I think you answered the question.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next up is Commissioner Detman.
Thanks so much. Again, Brian Detman, Youth Development Oregon Director for the record. Appreciate the time. I had reviewed the material and I came up with some kind of observations from what I read. I think Commissioner Davala's point is one that I was kind of wondering in my head. I wrote it down here as kind of as she was talking, that I do find it helpful when given somebody said the number of documents, there's a lot of documents, 60 plus or 80 plus, I don't know, whatever the number was, that it might be helpful to, as the TA providers kind of go forward, to give some kind of here are takeaways that they're seeing, having more intimately read the material than maybe some of us. So I just say that I'm not sure. We can come to the end and once we've all had a chance to weigh in, but some things that jumped out to me, and I can't remember exactly which report I read some of these things in, but there's a point around sort of overrepresentation of youth of color in the juvenile justice system. Like there's a general statement about that, and kind of one of the bigger picture reports also points out an underserving certain populations of youth, rural youth in particular. And I think it's important for us to understand that there's both an overrepresentation of youth of color, and also I think youth of color are underserved in generally in services, and also that probably a reminder, I have to remind myself that rural youth also underserved, and rural youth will include youth of color. So the kind of nuances of populations I think matters, from rural to youth of color to indigenous youth who may or may not be counted as a part of the youth of color. So just a point to be made there. I was at the OJDDA conference, as probably many of you were, a few weeks ago, and saw, I think, an illuminating present. I have 17 seconds. Oh, I better be fast. I have an illuminating conversation by our friends from around JJPC data and some overall state data, referral data. I didn't see some of the big picture statewide data around referrals. I saw county by county data, which is also super helpful, but I kind of wish that there was a way to share that. I'm going to take a couple, give me 30 more seconds. I did see what I thought was interesting, that I saw a number of African American youth who were admitted to detention in counties where, my assumption, I don't know that there are large populations of African American youth. Probably a good note to self. Hey, guess what? Folks of color, Black folks, African American youth are everywhere. So if people tell you they're not in counties all over the state, they are. But then I also had a bit of oh, interesting to see a couple of youth here and a couple of youth there, in Umatilla, in Lynn, and Malheur, and Klamath, and Columbia counties. I just, that jumped out at me. Finally, I think there was a Multnomah County detention data point that seemed incorrect, and I just point that out just because I was like, wait, what is the real data point? And then finally, on system of care and just broader substance use disorder information, I didn't see much. I'm sure maybe I missed it, but I kind of wish there was more there in terms of services and their lack of supports, because I know counties are doing a lot of that work, sometimes in their juvenile services, but sometimes in other places. Those are my observations. Thanks for the extra
Thank
time.
you.
And next up, Commissioner Gielen.
I always have to follow Brian. I honestly have to say I was reviewing these from a particular perspective, and that's really with the work of ODHS in mind. So I probably saw a lot more than existed, but was really interested in the intersections between child welfare and juvenile justice and thinking about the ways in which child welfare is a driver into the juvenile justice system and better system coordination between the two could have a significant impact. I also think with a lens of really wanting to focus on prevention and on racial and ethnic disparities. And I feel like looking at some of those intersections of how we both serve crossover youth better, as well as prevent youth in the child welfare system from kind of coming into the juvenile justice system is the area of excitement for me. Like I said, probably not totally neutral. I do think that it's a space where, at least within my realm of view, there's not a lot of work right now that's happening. So it doesn't feel duplicative of other efforts that are happening in other spaces that I'm aware of. So anyway, that's what stood out to me and is of interest in moving forward, is looking at child welfare as a driver.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Commissioner Kay Williams.
Hi, everybody. When thinking about, you're going to hear I have some similarities with Commissioner Gielen in terms of what I was looking for in a lens. And I tried to think about looking at key drivers of our system. And when I think of key drivers of our system, I think of both entry into the system and different points in our juvenile justice system where some children exit and others remain. For example, charging versus diversion, detention versus release, adjudication or dismissal, and dispositional entries and exits like probation and remaining in your home versus probation and out of home placement, and then finally placement in a youth correctional facility. And I think that there are key drivers of each of these, to the entry, but also to the exits that we need to be mindful of. There was a report, the study of factors that affect the likelihood of juvenile justice involvement, a 2022 report that looked in detail at DC that I think was really interesting. And also the data report from the Oregon System of Care for Youth, which also had a lot of really good Oregon specific data. That's from April 22nd of 2025. And between those, I think that there are these other systems. And when I think about a statewide commission, looking at other statewide systems that have factors that may be system drivers. For example, in the System of Care report, 57% of youth in OIA have a mental health diagnosis. 50% have a special education history. 95% have a trauma history. 14% have experienced housing instability. And when you look at the DC report, it talked about the biggest drivers that they showed with data were homelessness, child abuse, neglect, a whole bunch of educational issues related to being on an IEP, grade retention, suspension, absenteeism, and living in a hot block where your neighborhood, there are some neighborhood factors relating to gun violence that may drive juvenile justice involvement. This study also found that, putting everything aside, that educational experiences have the largest impact on juvenile justice. So I think that I would agree with Commissioner Gielen, looking at some of these larger system issues or particular populations of youth, and then looking how they move through the system. I'll finish in 20 seconds, I promise. I think would be helpful. I also think it was Commissioner Detman who talked about the need for data. The System of Care report talked about data that the Oregon Youth Authority is collecting. And I think that Debbie Martin explained at one of our prior meetings that there's an intake form that all youth fill out where the information is collected. I'm not seeing the same level of youth specific information from JJPC relating to these other key drivers. It may be there and I don't know, but that is something else that this commission can talk about. We're supposed to be data driven. One of the things we may ask for is a data bill like House Bill 3005, which passed in 2025, that requires DHS to report, among other things, the percentage of foster youth with dual system involvement.
Thank you, Commissioner K. Williams.
Commissioner Keast.
Thank you. So my background is as an appellate lawyer, appellate youth defense. And so I certainly bring that perspective in terms of hewing really closely to statutory directives, and then thinking about statutory changes that can be made or additions, things that can be changed. So I think I'm still getting up to speed on the materials, of course, having just been appointed about a week and a half ago. But I think that some of the themes that stood out to me from what I reviewed were kind of like school-based referrals and that school to prison pipeline idea, which I think overlays a lot with, because I think a lot of youth do get involved in the system because of school-based referrals or school-based issues. And then there were disparities within how schools handle things in particular, and then how juvenile departments handle things. There was also disparity county by county, and the both racial and ethnic, and also disability status, which I thought was interesting too, about the IEPs that kids are on and how that correlates with system involvement. One of the things that concerns me from a sort of statutory level is that some of the reports noted a lack of statewide procedures and the geographic differences in how different counties do different things, both juvenile departments and trial courts. And that is something that concerns me as well, and things that I think we could look at going forward in terms of proposing policies or legislative changes. I thought the training both of juvenile judges and defense attorneys was really key thing that some of the studies pointed out. And then I would like to see strengthening of processes or establishment of uniform processes for appointment of counsel early and appointment of counsel throughout post disposition, appeal, motions to set aside, motions for dismissal, post adjudication. So that's what stood out to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Up next, Commissioner Rogers.
Good afternoon. Oh my gosh, just listening to the commission members, I've learned a lot just from perspectives. I also probably look through it through a lens from juvenile justice and a long time and the changes. Some highlights that I took away really were around, first and foremost was, I'm going to lift up the girls and the change in data for young men and males, and the difference in decrease of referrals and all sorts of different things, and the lack of that same impact on young girls. The other is really around the drivers. Really appreciated both the NPC research document as well as a system of care document to kind of look through, and both of those had recommendations. They had policy recommendations. And so I do think even taking a look at what's been done before and what those recommendations are, that I don't necessarily know we have to reinvent the wheel. That a lot of it's kind of there, and which all align with what everyone has said. I also think reading through a couple, typically read through counsel, understanding the role of counsel in cases, I think is really important. I appreciated that from Commissioner Keast to really highlight that piece. The other part that just looking through detention and how we've changed the use of detention over the last 20 years and the decrease in the number of youth being placed in detention and what that looks like. And of course, the school where youth are coming from. This was a lot of data that I also think we could flip it and kind of dig in to understand what's working, and taking a look at the recidivism data from the JJPC and what counties, maybe tasking the counties that have lower rates to take a look at what their systems look like, and see if there's anything we can glean from that. To JJPC, the statewide data is there's so much information in JJPC. We just need to ask the research questions.
And once we come up with the research questions, I think that Mark Greenwald with Oregon Youth Authority could probably help us figure those particular pieces out. I don't think I'm gonna use all my time, Kyla.
Wow, thank you, Molly.
So Chair, officially you are the last one to participate. And I just wanted to point out though, that Mike Tassine from OYA is here in the meeting today. And while I understand he hasn't officially received his entrance onto the commission, I didn't know if you wanted to have him give his input since we're doing information sharing. I'll let you decide that. I didn't want him to think we were just passing him over though.
Absolutely, I'm fine with that. Commissioners, are you okay with that? All right, seeing the nod. Almost Commissioner Tassine. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong Romero. I appreciate it. I'll be brief since I'm not an official commissioner. When I go through that list of things that stand out to me the most, and that because my background is really the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health. So of course, I'm going to focus a lot of my efforts on early interventions, behavioral health and community interventions where we're not removing kids from the home. How can we provide services in the home? How can we keep kids in their communities with their families and providing interventions that are going to make a difference, but making sure that they are culturally responsive. So when I think behavioral health, I'm thinking that we have to always make sure that we're building programs and services that are going to be responsive to the people we're there to serve. And so a lot of it is about how do we find those early interventions and how do we get the kids in the right systems of care? Because we know that pushing kids into child welfare so they can access services doesn't necessarily always get us the results we want. The same thing is true for criminal justice. So with that, I will yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. I believe I'm last, and a lot of what I wrote down was a lot of folks just said what I wrote down, and I do want to uplift the fact that the initial reason for this additional meeting was because some folks didn't have access to the inventory because of the way it was shared. And so there was a request at the last meeting to have more time to go over the inventory. So our technical assistance providers, Eliza Kaplan sent out, and CSG, they sent out the inventory on August 29th, I believe. We had our commission meeting on November 3rd, on September 3rd, that's where I'm at. And there is a summary of all of the reports, which is also helpful. I think for me, the thing that I kept going back to, like Commissioner Rogers, was the juvenile justice aspect and what's happening in my community. And I would be interested to hear in the discrepancy that Commissioner Detman found, but I'll connect with him at a later date. For the Multnomah County data, one of the things that we are grappling with in Multnomah County is the fact that we have youth who have been in detention for over 500 days. We currently have 2 who've been in detention for 931 days. I can't help but to think about the reports, the disparity data, and also just the system overlap, justice by geography. All of those things are things that weigh in my mind, but I think about 2 Measure 11, right? And I think that there are so many positives of SB 1008, while there also isn't much research since 2020 regarding the impact of SB 1008, and I didn't see that included. Maybe others may have, but I think it would be interesting to learn more about if it's just the Multnomah County thing, right? That we have these kids languishing in detention, and we've had to be very, very creative on resources. Several of them have graduated high school, and so we have had to tap into college, and I have some youth there longer than I have some staff. And it's really difficult. And I don't know if I'm an anomaly in the state of Oregon, but in talking with some of my peers around the country, it's not something that I've heard is normal. And so my hope is that we can talk a little bit more about that. And all of the youth who are in detention for over 500 days have had some contact with the child welfare system as well, which I found interesting. And so it's multifaceted, and I appreciated a lot of information, the depth of information, and nothing in the research was new to me, at least. But it was interesting to be reminded of the issues and the disparities and the uniqueness of Oregon. So with that, I'd like to begin. We have about a little less than an hour left, and I would love to open up the space for larger discussion. I think one of the goals that we had, or that we set, was to have a concrete plan of sort for how we wanted to proceed or move forward. Whether it's, I asked if we wanted to have the technical assistance providers come back and talk through the specifics of the report. If that's a need, we can definitely think about using November for some of that. Also, if you feel like you have all the information that you need and you would like to really start to dig into what the commission was tasked to do, I think that's a conversation that we should also have if folks are prepared to do that.
Molly, you have your hand up. I don't know if Kyla saw that.
Oh, let's dig in,
sorry,
Kyla.
I didn't see it.
That's okay. Let's dig in. I think you've set the stage. It's great. Let's dig in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Commissioner Rogers. And I think, it's important for us to have diverse voices. I think about Commissioner Dabala and perhaps what you're hearing working directly with some of the youth who are in OYA and some of their thoughts about their sentences or their weight, if there is one. I think that you have an ear to the street, if that makes sense. And it would be really great to hear their perspectives and others.
Yeah, I am working, I think, with some of the specific youth you were talking about, and I started that because you had shared about those kids that have been there for so long. And, it's a different kind of environment than like McLaren. And so there's not that level of where they're talking to me and confiding in me in the same way as McLaren. But the principal she was like, at this meeting, could you please say something specific about what you were saying about these kids that have been there for so long? Yeah, one of them, he's an amazing student and such a hard worker, one of the ones you were talking about in college. And so just thought it's like missing this entire youth, and they don't even, I think they're still waiting to find out like even where they're going to be, like which county. I mean, they're like not even that far in the process, some of this stuff. So, and I was talking about, I don't know, we probably don't get to make this kind of recommendation, but there's supposed to be like a right to a speedy trial. And so I don't know where that falls in line with it. But obviously this is nowhere near speedy at all. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that, but just it is really crazy to see them being there for years of their youth. And I can't imagine for the families as well.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I definitely want to uplift the fact that when we appreciate additional help, because there are several unmet needs. I think what's really hard is the victim perspective, right? And you have youth who are pre-adjudicated, so they can't really talk too much about the why. And they don't know what to say, but they've been languishing. And then you go to court and you have victims in the room who hear about how well perhaps a young person is doing in detention, and those victims may not have their young person. And so it's like a catch-22 with no good outcome either way. But that's a really important point. Thank you so much, Commissioner Dabala, and thank you for letting me kind of pick on you.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Lisa K. Williams. I'm not sure if Kyla can see the hands.
Oh,
I can just, I'll call.
I
Or
cannot
just
see
speak
the
up.
hand.
I'm not sure we have to use the raise the hand function.
Yeah, please
Okay.
just speak.
I want to make sure that I'm using the lens. And I know that as a commission, there are lots of things that we can do. There's so much that we can do. And part of it is I get a little overwhelmed by all the different issues that we could address. But I've really been trying to focus on this question that's in the statute about key drivers of system involvement. And it would help me in terms of narrowing it down. If we were to think about answering this question about key drivers of system involvement, thinking about a particular stage of the system, are we looking at key drivers to commitment, or thinking about particular factors in terms of key drivers or particular people who we know are entering the system? And I do think looking at children who are involved with child welfare, and hearing the conversation we were just having about the number of youth who currently are spending a lot of time in detention in Multnomah County did have child welfare involvement. I think about the educational system, and there is a lot of data that's being collected about experiences of youth and what are your educational experiences both before you enter the juvenile justice system, and because education is both your educational experience can be a risk factor for entering the juvenile justice system, but it can be a protective factor to keep you out of the juvenile justice system, and it can help you exit the juvenile justice system, looking at that. Or another particular population, sometimes kids who take a really long time to resolve their cases are kids who have dual involvement with the intellectual and disability services, because those youth frequently they take a long time to get assessments because they can't aid and assist, and then they take a long time in restorative services. And so it would help me try to narrow the scope, because I feel like we need to start somewhere. If we had a particular place to start at, or we were looking at a particular factor or particular experience that kids have that we know influences entry into the juvenile justice system.
This is sort of related to what Commissioner K. Williams referenced. I heard 3 drivers primarily in people's around behavioral health, schools, and child welfare. And then in terms of decision points within the system, I heard kind of referrals, detention, probation, and commitment. So it might be interesting to take what data we have through JJPC and potentially through ODHS has the OKID database that looks across some systems. Just seeing if there are any ways to kind of do some data matching or deeper dive at those decision points and with cross-system data and see what's available and looking at those drivers at those different decision points.
And I just ask if both you, Commissioner Gielen and Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, if you think that having additional information would be helpful, like having our TA providers do an additional data dive, or what would be your recommendation?
I think that we have a lot of information in terms of research, and I don't think and the research seems to be fairly specific, even if it's not in Oregon, about what these key drivers are. So I don't think we need more research. And I want to say the flip side to the key drivers are also the flip side of what some studies call protective factors. So I think it's helpful to look at that too, because ideally what we would come up with in terms of policy is what do we need to do to improve success? Which I think we would all say means probably not entering the juvenile justice system. So I don't think that there's more information that we need. I actually found the level of information we have to be a little overwhelming. I do think that there are these key, like Commissioner Geelan talked about, these key decision points, and then these experiences that I'm going to call them experiences that kids have related to child welfare, education. Commissioner Geelan mentioned another one. She said it much better than I did. But looking at how we describe those and doing some definitions around those, and then asking some research questions, because it's possible that this information exists in JJPC. And if it does, then I think we should try to have it and then look at policy decisions. For example, in the DC study, they found an earlier study they did in 2020 found school suspensions led to juvenile justice involvement. They did not find that data piece later, and they thought that one of the reasons is because there was a law in DC in between that limited the circumstances in which a school can suspend youth, and it made a significant difference. So I think we need more information before we can make policy recommendations.
So I'm curious because it sounds twofold, and I'm confused, and it just might be me, Commissioner Lisa K. Williams, but it sounds like you want more research, but don't want more information. Who would do the research?
I'm interested to see what in answering these questions about, for example, sometimes they're called crossover youth. Kids who are involved in the child welfare system and then enter the juvenile justice system. There are differences around about how you define that. Is it any touches with the child welfare system? Is it that you're in the custody of DHS at the time you enter the juvenile justice system? But I didn't see the countywide data on child welfare experience at these different decision points, and because most of them are at the county. They may exist. I just didn't see that I had access to them. There is information in the System of Care report that used a lot of information from the Oregon Youth Authority that gathered more of that information. So I guess in terms of, I feel like the information or the research, I felt like I had a lot of good information about research, but I didn't necessarily have information about specific data points for kids' experiences in Oregon, and wondered if there was more information about these specific experiences of kids in Oregon. Does that make sense? I'm just wondering if there's more information in JJPC that we could ask, and then we could use to make policy recommendations.
Sure, and that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. I do want to just uplift that JJPC is not the child welfare systems. Like there's no, right? So there's a different database.
But for example, does JJPC capture if a child had child welfare experience? Is that in there? Does it capture if kids were in foster care at the time or had a dependency case at the time they entered the juvenile justice system? I think that those are pieces that I didn't, if they're in the inventory and I missed them, I'm sorry. But for example, an IEP, I would want to know how many youth who entered the juvenile justice system have an individualized education plan. I would want to know what their educational experiences were. What was their school enrollment and attendance? What was their discipline history? Because I think that the research shows all of those have a very significant impact on entry. And then you look at, are there policy decisions that you can make that would then significantly impact these key drivers, sort of like what happened in DC, where they limited the circumstances in which youth can be suspended. For example, in Oregon, there's a very broad disciplinary category for students who show willful disobedience. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in the legislature, like, what does that mean? We know that youth of color are significantly overrepresented in school discipline. And if school discipline can drive juvenile justice involvement, if we're able to make policy recommendations around these key drivers, then I think that's what we should do.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers, I did see your hand raised. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Commissioner K. Williams was doing a great job. So I really would recommend that we invite OKIDs to one of our meetings to do a presentation, because I have seen this presentation that Commissioner K. Williams is asking about in Oregon. And it's talking about the key drivers and the crossover, because they did a disaggregated coin. I don't know. Research I'm gonna lose it, but there's some sort of coin that they match date of birth and different things on. And they did a longitudinal study, and they can tell us in that OKIDS report what the key drivers are headed into the child welfare and juvenile justice, and both the risk and the protective factors. So, for example, child welfare indicates a higher risk of going into juvenile justice. DHS self-sufficiency actually shows that it is a protective factor for youth to not enter the juvenile justice system. So I would recommend us inviting OKIDs who've done that work in Oregon to come and present. And the second piece is, we talk about JJPC a lot, and all counties are mandated to do the juvenile crime prevention risk assessment for every youth who comes into the system. And so I would invite, I think another research team is NPC, because NPC has done research for us. And I don't know, that one's a money issue. So I get that we may not be able to do that, but I do know that at one point NPC did a research project on the criminogenic risk factors that indicate or are drivers for youth to go further in the system or have different things. And it's not perfect, but at least that's Oregon data again, and it has been done. And so connecting with NPC to see which risk factors and protective factors. And my last thing on JJPC is not all counties put child welfare data in JJPC. And so that's why the coin issue with OKIDs and the research department of DHS and research with OYA is a really great partnership there to be able to find that. But the data is there. It's a webinar, but if we could invite them, that would be great. Thanks, Kayla.
Commissioner DeBala?
Yes, I was just going to say, I don't know if this is jumping too far ahead or something, but I feel like for me, if like it feels very vast still, like we've been here for a while and everything just feels very vast. And I almost feel like if there was something like I had an assignment that was, your job is to go through all this data, find the key drivers or whatever it is, like something specific that maybe I was assigned to do with a specific question in mind, or I feel like, I don't know if that's jumping too far ahead in this, but there's all these different categories, and it's almost like if all of us are just doing all of it and we're thinking about all of it, it's like going to be, I feel like it's going to be hard to get to that point where a lot of, like people are saying, a lot of this information is already there. It's just a matter of how are we going to do it. So I almost wonder if there's like to narrow the scope for certain people. I don't know. That's my thought. For me anyway, that would be a lot easier if I had an assignment and it's like next meeting you come and you've done this, you know.
Thank you, Commissioner DeBala. Commissioner Keys?
Thank you. I want to echo what Commissioner Rogers said about having this presentation, this webinar, because it sounds like we do have a lot of data and a lot of information. What we need is sort of twofold. One is like synthesis of what we already have. And then second is more targeted questions asked to the people who can run the data from perhaps JJPC, perhaps from the OKID systems, to get the sort of information that we want. Like, so I think we need to figure out a synthesis of what we have, which is kind of in the inventory, but not on a statistical kind of level. And then in the summary, I mean, and then kind of going forward, what gaps are left that we could get from data that's already being collected through particularized research questions. And I think in terms of the sort of overwhelm that I think many of us might be experiencing, I think it might be helpful to think about the report that we have due coming in September, and what do we, not substantively what we want it to say, but what sort of points do we want to be making? Do we want to make a policy recommendation? Do we want to just make a sort of informative report about this is what we found and these are kind of the directions that we're moving? I think, making policy recommendations, that's a pretty tight deadline with all the sort of data and analysis that we still kind of want to do. But I think it might be helpful too to think through these questions for kind of our next steps with that viewpoint of, we have this kind of thing due, and what do we want to use that to accomplish?
I agree. And I know, Kelly, you have your hand raised. I just wanted to chime in. Thank you, Commissioner Keys. I was going to raise that is our homework assignment. We have a definitive date of September 1 to have something prepared. And what the something is up to us. I think the complexity is that there are different folks who cycle in and out of the commission, right? And so for one person, it may be that this is the interest, right? That we want to hear about this. For another person, it may be this. Another person, it may be this. I think where the commission needs to move towards is the one thing for now that we are going to focus on. And if it's having, like we have SOCAC coming in November to provide a presentation, we can absolutely we can continue to invite folks to present, like we just had JDIP come in. I'm curious though, if the presentations that we have, where does that drive the commission? So sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, it's all right. I just wanted to hop on. I know there was a question about who would do the research with these more data points, and I just wanted to chime in. That's where CJC, I'm the senior research analyst that's supporting this. So this is kind of where we come into play in terms of once you have a specific research question, which it seems like you all are getting there, then we can work with partnering with OIA or ODHS, or I'm not sure if OCID allows data sharing agreements to have their raw data, but we can start a collaboration and explore the actual topics that maybe these decision points weren't in these research briefs you got from the TA provider, but we can analyze it ourselves, break it out by certain counties or what have you, but that's where we would come into play. And by we, I mean me.
Thank you.
I also, sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think, one thing we could do is sort of look at what Commissioner K. Williams was kind of talking about different points in the life of a juvenile justice system sort of case or involvement, and just pick one of those points and sort of focus on that. That might mean entry into the system. That might be something that we want to focus on, because that would include racial disparities, it would include other inequities, and it could touch into the school data. Yeah, it should definitely touch into the child welfare data, especially foster care placements, I think, and removals. And then other kind of like the behavioral health needs that almost Commissioner Tassin was reflecting on. So I think that might be one thing to do, or one way to sort of approach limiting the scope of the current report, is to think about one point at the system. How do we divert kids? How do we keep kids out of the system from entering the system? Or if we don't like that point, we could talk about, what are the disparities in disposition, and how can we make dispositions more equitable, or et cetera. But I think it sounds like to me, from the folks who've expressed themselves today, that kind of entry point, like system entry, might be a helpful place to start.
Commissioner Tassin. Almost.
I think Commissioner Detman had his hand up first.
Sorry, Commissioner Detman, I didn't see you. You're on a different screen.
No worries. I just wanted to sort of support Commissioner Keith's idea. I mean, and it's starting to come into maybe focus that and folks who are in the juvenile system will know better than me all the different decision points, but starting at that kind of referral level or picking one, and I can't remember if they're like 9 or something from my Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative days, JDAI days. I can't remember exactly, but there are a number of those decision points, and that might be a real picking one seems wise because that is a good method, a framework for perhaps for us to then say, okay, with that, then we can talk about different systems. I just, like the idea that Commissioner Keith kind of laid out, and the things that I am particularly interested in, I mean, are across the spectrum of decisions. And that one, it does seem like there's some interesting, I don't know if opportunity is the right word, but yeah, I think that's a good way that the framework or a thing that we could use to help us make a decision.
Commissioner Tazine.
Thank you, Chair Armstrong Romero. I appreciate it. I agree with both Kista and Detman is that focus is important here. Otherwise we are going to be lost. So we know that we have to have focus in order to have impact. But how we choose that is really important, because in my mind, I go to, if everything else remains relatively the same, what one change would have the biggest impact in 2 years? So what's that one thing? Because we really can't do all things. So how do we focus on that? So something I've used in this space before is an intercept model, where we get to look at all the different intercepts throughout the juvenile justice system. What are all the interventions that exist within that system? And then looking for where do we see really key gaps within that? Part of the reason why I like behavioral health, community interventions, and early interventions. One, early interventions always a wise investment. And then behavioral health is because not only does that help prevent kids from coming to me, it also helps me when I'm putting kids back in the community. I think it also is going to help the schools. It's going to help child welfare. It's going to help everybody. But maybe that's not the place where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So intercept models kind of can give us some clarity as a state system. If I was to get more granular, I'd be like, oh man, it'd be great if we could have every county do their own intercept model. We can have a statewide one. That's not going to happen. If we could even just get a statewide one of what's available there. But I'll yield back my time as an almost commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisa Kay.
I am wondering when we're going to have someone from ODE join, and that might impact which direction we're going. We clearly have a DHS expert, and so I think that the key, talking about, Commissioner Gielan talked about like the 5 key decision points there that you could look at. For example, how many children are in DHS custody at the time of referral? How many of them are and then we could ask questions about what happens, what's their experience as they go through these key decision points. And I think from the information from OIA, it looks like if you are in if you're in DHS custody at referral, are you more likely to have a more significant, are you more likely to move further in the juvenile justice system? In terms of education, I think that given the research that shows education has one of the largest impacts on juvenile justice involvement, I think it would be really interesting if we knew at referral how many kids are enrolled in school, how many kids have experienced suspensions from school, and how many school moves have kids had, and at the time of referral, are kids on an IEP? And really looking at the There are a lot of educational models that people are talking about around the state regarding access to services and attendance. I think suspension is something that we could look at in terms of a policy discussion, but I think that those educational experiences have a significant impact on referral into the juvenile justice system based on the information we were provided in the inventory.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to note that Commissioner Detman is here on behalf of Oregon ODE. Just that was. Commissioner Detman, did you have something additional that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of clarify that. Yeah, I'm technically in that slot, and while I'm my own, with Youth Development Oregon, we've made, we decided as two agencies that I would kind of represent both our youth development agency and the Department of Ed. But to Commissioner K. Williams' point, I could bring that question back, or we could bring a guest from ODE, one of their research people. I can be the conduit to help us get that information.
Okay, I mean, I think it makes sense to use the expertise that we have in the commission, and I guess that's it.
Thank you. Just a time check. We have about 23 minutes left. I do want to highlight that with the key priority areas within House Bill 2320, the JJPC may do 4 things, right? Which is recommend legislation, appropriations, administrative policies, and practices for statewide adoption, assess the impact of current legislation involving juvenile justice and related initiatives, develop data-driven best practices, guidance, training, and materials for state agencies, juvenile courts, county juvenile departments, and practitioners, oversee state and private funding for pilot projects, system innovations, and other initiatives through competitive selection process. So I just wanted to highlight those points in statute and be clear that there are some groups that are working on specifically child welfare related data. SOCAC is one of them, right? And you'll hear from Anna K. Williams and Sandra Santos in November about some of the efforts and the focus that they have within the child welfare framework. And I think that the gap is specifically focusing on juvenile justice. And so I want to kind of route us back. Definitely crossover youth is something that is important and we need to focus on. And juvenile justice, which is why I joined this commission, is something that is lacking in many ways. So Commissioner Rogers?
Thank you, Kyla. I really appreciate those comments. And I want to come back to the key drivers conversation. And I appreciate child welfare. Everyone knows that the crossover and the intersection of those, but I want to not miss what Chair Armstrong talked about in the beginning with the youth that are stuck in detention. And the key drivers of how kids end up in there, in that decision point, and then languish. And there are laws in place around limitation of time, and yet clearly there are ways around that. And so I do want to bring us back to, I love behavioral health. There's whole sections working on behavioral health, truly looking at the drivers at juvenile justice and how they get hung up and languish in the system, I think is kind of the point. I don't want our juvenile justice kids to be invisible anymore. And I think that's why I was super excited to join this policy commission, is to lift up and celebrate the amazing youth that find themselves in the juvenile justice system at points in time. So again, I think we can have the key drivers. I'm really excited about that, and really the school piece of it, but always keep it in the context of juvenile justice. So,
Thank
sorry.
you so much, Commissioner Rogers. That's perfect. And I going back to something that Commissioner Keast mentioned, I do think that there are various system drivers or drivers of system involvement. One of the things that you mentioned, Commissioner Keast, was kind of the lack of statewide standardization or the increased judicial workload and processing strain and treatment capacity. And I think that, you know, what one of the inventory reports referenced was just the racial gap in mental health services and an overall service shortfall and high unmet mental health needs. I think that there are so many different drivers for system involvement. And when you bring up race and ethnicity as well, in comparison to, you know, it's just, there's disparities. And I think the race and ethnicity piece is very important when we're talking about system involvement and drivers of system involvement, particularly in places like Multnomah County. So it sounds like focusing on key drivers of system involvement is one that most folks, and it doesn't stray from our priority area, right? That was our priority area. I think the next steps, obviously, we don't have quorum and we are not prepared to vote. However, in November, hopefully we will, and then we can move forward. Commissioner Dabala, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you had your hand raised, so please.
I guess I was just going to say, like, for example, when you're talking about the key systems driver and you're saying like maybe racial disparities or something like that, then the question that I'm just wondering is what has worked for students of color to keep them out of there and what hasn't. And that's like, to me, the basis of what we would be looking at. So it's like, so yeah, it's like, it feels almost like we know the drivers now, a lot of it. So it's just kind of like, well, what was effective to prevent those disparities in certain places in Oregon, wherever it is. So that's kind of what I feel like I would want to focus on at this point.
For sure. One of the reports talked about the persistent disparities at referral and that Black youth are more than 2.5 times more likely, Native youth more than 1.5 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile department than white youth. And if you delve into the data around youth who are referred to diversion or who have opportunities to be diverted, that is even more, there's even more of a disparity.
And I think, you know, focusing on topics like that does give us the opportunity, you know, looking at things that have worked to reduce that does give us the opportunity to make policy recommendations. And that might be something like Commissioner K. Williams was discussing about, like, you know, a statewide statute that limits what you can suspend a child for at school, or something like that. So it allows us to make particular policy or legislative recommendations. I think what might be helpful going forward is, it sounds like two things. One is like picking what we want to focus on for this next report, you know, keeping in mind that we have to do this report every 2 years. Like, we can pick another one 2 years from now. We can pick the next step in the stage, in the process, or what have you. But also thinking about particular research questions that we want to ask the different systems or the different data collection folks, which I think maybe if we can all think about that between now and the next meeting, that would sort of give some direction to the folks who come before us to talk about the data sets that they have and what we feel like is missing from what we have now.
Any other thoughts?
Chair Armstrong Murrah, I'm just going to jump in since I raised my hand and I see Mary's going to.
Yeah, sorry.
That's right, because I'm on the other screen. Mary will. Sorry, Mary, you have to go next. I will say that again, I think deciding on a like what point in the juvenile system, as I said before, makes a lot of sense. And if we looked a little later, there's the referral and the things that drive people into the system, and then there's a little bit later down the line if somebody is in the system and what keeps them in or makes it harder for them to come out. And in some ways, I think there are probably similar drivers around rather than upstream systems that kind of force them one direction. Those same systems are either not as available in abundance, or not as culturally responsive, or not available, back to the abundance in a rural space, or not gender affirming for girls, or so. I'll say at Youth Development Oregon, in partnership with our juvenile justice, or really led by our juvenile justice committee, are thinking about kind of probation reform issues. So if we were a bit more downstream as a decision point, that would be also really dovetail and align nicely with some work that we're thinking about as an agency. And again, I'm imagining that, as I said, some of those drivers are the same. They have different, they're levers that do different things, but they, at a systemic level, I bet there's some similar issues. So I just wanted to put that in the space.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Hewitt.
This is why I don't like following Commissioner Detman, because he said what I was going to say. Having experienced conversations in the past around particularly racial and ethnic disparities at the referral point, it often becomes a blame circle of the juvenile justice system points at law enforcement points at whoever calls into 911, and then we end up in a circle rather than thinking about the system. Once youth are already in the juvenile justice system, what's within kind of the control of those folks in the system. And I think that's where we have the greatest potential for influence as our commission's focus. So just wanted to affirm that I think it makes sense to do what Commissioner Detman said.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisa K. Williams.
Thank you. I don't know if this is what Commissioner Detman was talking about specifically in terms of overlap, but for example, with probation reform, which is solidly within the juvenile justice system, when you look at probation conditions, sometimes probation conditions are obey the rules of your placement. Sometimes they are attend school and obey all school rules. But when you look at youth who when you look at the intersection of what happens, the experiences our youth have, if you're in foster care, you're more likely to be have placement turnover that isn't because of something you did, but it's because of the placement, something beyond your control. Or if you're in school and you're a youth of color, you're more likely to have disproportionate disciplinary stuff that you're likely to be suspended from school that's not really about something that you did. And really looking at changing those probation conditions and the focus can significantly change the experiences that kids have and what their success can be on probation, and can limit the number of youth who further enter the juvenile justice system in terms of out-of-home placement or placement in youth correctional facility for reasons that are really beyond their control and aren't about the reasons that they entered foster care. And so maybe if we're talking about after all these discussions about a particular decision point, maybe that since the vast majority of kids who are in the juvenile justice system are on probation, maybe looking at that decision points around that related to particular factors like child welfare experience, like special ed, educational experiences and looking at those particular experiences related to that particular decision point could lead to best practices that are data driven and could lead to legislative recommendations and could address this issue about that we've sort of talked about here. Sorry, I promise I'll be quiet in a minute about this. I think that probation, from what I have seen in my practice, probation practices around the state differ vastly. And the sort of like the justice by geography, which seems extraordinarily unfair, that could be a point where we could really intervene in some of that maybe successfully.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to just note that in looking at probation reform, I think the commission will always kind of come back to the same point in that there is no statewide standardization, right? So that goes back to that justice by geography, where some youth have opportunities and others don't. And outcomes and consistency in our judicial processes are just going to depend on the county which the youth relies or lives in. And so I want to call that out, that there are so many inconsistencies statewide, regardless of whether it's probation, diversion, the decision to divert, and also the change in thought process at this point about criminal justice overall and diversion. And I think that there's things that have changed and that are changing, especially in certain districts. So I just wanted to call that out, and I have no solution, but I just wanted us to remember that that's a really important point, is that justice by geography, and by focusing on probation reform without statewide standardization, that we might get ourselves into a pickle. But with that, I will give Commissioner Rogers a few minutes, and then in 1 minute, we are going to have public comment opportunity, and then we'll talk about our next meeting. Commissioner Rogers.
I will only take, so yes, and there is a difference across the state. And I think that there are county juvenile department directors that will come to the table and have open discussions about the incredible value of being local and state partnership. And so I've been around a long time, and we've come together multiple times to create space that is consistent, as well as maintaining some open kind of changes. I am very aware of justice by geography, and it worries me a lot. And I think we need to have our county partners at the table to have a lot of those conversations.
I think that is where, and I'm so sorry, Lisa, okay, we don't have time, but I think Commissioner Rogers, that having OJDDA perhaps have the conversations where there's space where you can have that conversation, but the commission still maintaining its focus as commissioners. I think that's the part that we need to keep in mind. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to public comment, or actually, I'm so sorry, reverse order. The next steps. Our next steps is that we have a SOCAC presentation on November 6th. I strongly encourage everyone to participate November 6th and invite your friends as well, especially fellow commissioners. We really need quorum. I would like to introduce a meeting schedule discussion in November, as that will be our last meeting for the year. And hopefully we will not have more doodle polls. I'm so sorry, Commissioner Detman. I know those are your favorite. Hopefully we can talk about the possibility of longer meetings, and maybe we have virtual and more virtual meetings, and then have some site visits. Maybe we can go out on tour and kind of see what's happening in different locations. That's an option, but just giving you a nugget to think about. There's also a couple other business pieces that we will have to accomplish, such as every year we are required to elect a new vice chair. So that hopefully can happen in our November 6th meeting. So there are additional appointments that might happen in November as well. Hopefully Commissioner Tessine will be one of those. But there's a chance. So with that, any questions about our next steps? What I've heard today is the need to perhaps invite some additional folks to our meeting, perhaps from OCID. And I'm missing the other. MPC. Was that an action item that folks are interested in? Somebody who could speak to the JJPC data and the child welfare data in the intersection. Maybe that's something that we can explore. I really hope that folks take a moment to look at our website with all of our information on the CJC site and reflect on what the JJPC may do and should focus on before our next meeting. With that, I would invite members of the public to comment, and I request that your testimony be kept to 2 minutes.
I have a brief public comment. Just this is Jordan Bates with OJD. Judge Perez couldn't be here today. Just with the conversation relating to probation, it occurred to me this group might find it helpful that we've updated a model form for probation conditions that is much more simplified than I think what has been used. So that's just perhaps a starting place. There's a general conditions and a special conditions form available on OJD's website. If you have questions or comments or anything, please feel free to send them my way.
Thank you, Jordan. And if you could give the link maybe to Kelly so we can have that on the site, that would be great.
You bet.
Any other public comment? Made sure all my screens, nobody has their hand raised. All right. Well, thank you so much for today. I'll see everybody November 6th. It is hybrid, so see you then. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.